What is up, everybody? My name is Raymond Summerlin. This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the waiver wire edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, talking about waiver wire, talking about injuries here on a Monday afternoon. We do this every Monday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern. You can find us live on the Sharp Football Analysts YouTube channel if you're not watching us live. But if you are watching us live, also subscribe to the podcast. Why not? Download it, helps us out. We really appreciate it. And since I'm talking waiver wire, since I'm talking injuries, there's only one person to talk that with, and that is Tucker Bagley. How you doing, Tucker?
I'm doing good. And if you are watching live, download the podcast. If you download the podcast, watch it live. Like you can watch and you can listen twice. No one's stopping you. No one's stopping you from consuming this podcast multiple times a week.
I mean, except good taste, but you're right. That is the only thing that's the only thing stopping us. I do have to mention Tucker might be a little bit distracted during this particular recording because apparently there's a sport called baseball. Something's happening in baseball.
It's unbelievable.
I'm not sure.
Usually at what time is it? 4:00 on a Monday. There's nothing going on. Maybe the best baseball game of the year happening right now, but that's all right because if you're listening to the podcast, it's over. You already know what happened.
Yeah, you already know. You already know what happened. I do kid. Obviously, the Astros, my beloved Astros, as you can see behind me here, my beloved Astros came back from a terrible start to the season and are actually in the playoffs. But I won't lie to you. We kick off against the Tigers tomorrow. I was recording this on Monday. I'm not lying to you. I don't feel great. There are no great feelings. I don't have a lot of hope for where we're headed here. But you know what? Another playoff appearance. Good on the Astros, and y'all can all enjoy when we lose and just bring all your hate my way. And I'm there for it. Aston Villa, by the way, my soccer team plays against Bayern Munich in the Champions League this week. Big week for the Summerlin sports team. So we're getting excited about that. I had to watch my Penn State Nittany Lions play the most Big Ten game I've seen in the last 10 years against Illinois, but they won. So hey. Life's good around these parts. But we're going to talk, like I said, about injuries. Unfortunately, not a great week for injuries, especially to some big name fantasy players. And so it's going to be, maybe not the most lighthearted show because of some of the expectations we have for some of the injuries that we saw. But we have a lot of injuries. We'll get through that, some waiver wire ramifications. You can find actually Tucker's article about injuries, my articles about waiver wire. They're already up on the site with kind of some early thoughts. And then later in the week, we're going to update them with full analysis. So make sure you're checking at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Also over at sharpfootballanalysis.com, we have a promo running this week. It's our annual points promo. The promo code for it is points. And what we normally do is on the Thursday night game of week 4, we take however many points were scored. We give that as a discount. But we didn't have the best discount coming out of that game between the Giants and the Cowboys. So what we decided to do instead was take a look at Rico Dowdle's carries plus yards, which were both prop hits for us. We had over on both of those. Both went over. Add those together, 57% off. If you use promo code POINTS, you can get 57% off any package over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. That ends on Monday night. So if you're listening to this on Tuesday, I'm sorry, it ends on Monday night. Points, 57% off. If you are listening on Tuesday, there are other great deals at the site. Go and check it out. You can use it on our fantasy package, which will give you access to Rich Rebar's fantasy content, his weekly worksheet columns, which previews every single player and every single game every single week, which are great. And by the way, his weekly DFS picks, which absolutely smashed this week. I actually don't know if Rich still works for us because he may have made that much money playing DFS this week. So we'll have to see later in the week how that works out. So lots of great stuff over there. So make sure you check that out. But we have to get into the bad news talking about injuries. And the worst news, I think, of injuries from a fantasy perspective coming out of this week is Rashee Rice, which, it seems like he has a torn ACL. There was some interesting kind of reports today that they're maybe not so sure about that. But, I mean, we're expecting the worst here, aren't we, Tucker?
Yeah, especially when, he got hurt in the second quarter and they asked Andy Reid at halftime. And normally when a coach is asked, usually it's a we'll see at the very worst. And Andy Reid came out at halftime and basically said, well, it doesn't look good. We aren't expecting any positive news. And that's not a great sign. And then immediately after the game, it was pretty much, I think we're going to spend the rest of the season without him. Then it was reported, worst case scenario has happened. It is a torn ACL. So at this point, that's probably what I would expect, unless something miraculous happens, new imaging comes back and says something different. But for right now, I imagine they're without him for the rest of the season due to a torn ACL. And for a Chiefs offense that's already lost Hollywood Brown as Isaiah Pacheco on the IR for the next 6 to 8-ish weeks. I mean, you're now going into week 5 without your top 2 wide receivers and the running back that your offense has kind of been built around this season. I don't know, more heavy lifting for Patrick Mahomes moving forward.
Yeah, and it's their season has been so funny because I don't know that we would say that it's actually kind of similar to last season. I don't know if we say that they've really been great at any point, and yet here we are. They keep winning. They're the Chiefs. That's kind of where we are. But you do wonder if we reach a critical mass here of injuries in this offense, because that was the hope with this offense. Last year, the offense in the regular season at least wasn't very good. They draft Xavier Worthy. They bring in Hollywood Brown. Rashee Rice, coming off of his very tumultuous offseason, was still here, and we expected him to take a step forward. And that's exactly what we saw over the first 3 games from him. And so, you were getting excited. Okay, we're going to get this offense on track. Even if Travis Kelce wasn't being Travis Kelce, we'll get this offense on track. And now we're kind of back in the same situation. And the unfortunate part from a fantasy perspective, a waiver wire perspective, at least for this, is that when you're looking at, okay, well, where are these targets going to go? Where's the replacement? The guys that it's probably going to go to are probably not on the waiver wire. We have Travis Kelce, who ended up having his best game in week 4. He went 7 for 89, a 28% target share with Rashee Rice off the field. You would expect we're going to see his role expand and maybe become more even like that role that we saw him have in the playoffs last year, where they're just going to need more from him in that same area of the field where Rice was working underneath and things like that. And so I think we're just going to see a lot more targets for Travis Kelce, which if you drafted Travis Kelce and you've been very disappointed with him through 3 weeks, maybe this ends up working out for you, especially in a depressed tight end landscape. We also get to see more from Xavier Worthy, even though he's probably not going to work in the same areas of the field. We did see him get 4 targets in week 4. One of those was a long touchdown. But other than that, I mean, who are we really getting excited about? We saw Justin Watson, his route rate spiked a little bit, but he is who he is. He runs a lot of routes, doesn't get targets, not really the same type of player. If it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we'd probably be getting excited about Juju Smith-Schuster, because you would think that he's probably best suited to fill that kind of how they were using Rashee Rice, but he hasn't been good for a while. He hasn't been targeted on 7.1% of his routes thus far this season and did not get targeted against the Chargers. I mean, you're looking at Noah Gray, got a few more targets, Mecole Hardman. Are we going to believe in Sky Moore again? Like, you just look at everybody and you go, I don't really know where this is coming from. Are we going to see a trade? There's a player we're going to talk about a little bit later, Davante Adams. Could we see something like that show up? Could the Giants trade Darius Slayton to them? I've seen that rumor pop up. So we don't really know what's going on here. Ultimately, if I was adding one person, I would add Juju Smith-Schuster, who's available in almost every league, and see what happens there, because it does kind of fit that mold well. But I'm not going to spend a ton of fab on him. I'm not going to get excited about him. I think that this really could be the Travis Kelce and Xavier Worthy show, moving forward with the running back sprinkled in as well.
Yeah, Andy Reid even said during his press conference today that, we're just going to spread the ball around. Like, there is no one going to step into that role. No one's going to be, our number one wide receiver. And you can see it, right, based on the target share from last week. They had, 4 different guys get at least 3 targets, and none of them got more than 4. And that's kind of been Andy Reid's MO since he was, in Philadelphia back with Donovan McNabb all the way until now, is he likes spreading the ball around. He likes his quarterbacks being able to throw to 5 or 6 guys. And from a fantasy perspective, it's not exactly something that you can count on or something that's sustainable. So you mentioned Smith-Schuster, someone that probably has some familiarity with this offense and can be a decent fit, and maybe he gets a higher volume of targets moving forward. But at face value, I just don't know how much value there really is for any of these guys moving forward.
And I mean, when we saw Smith-Schuster with the Chiefs a couple of years ago, he did get some targets and he did have some big games. There were a few big games sprinkled in there, but it was mostly mostly underwhelming. And that was 2 years ago, Smith-Schuster. And so we just don't know where he is. But I mean, he is still really young. I don't know how old he is, but that was always one of the talking points was, how old do you think Juju Smith-Schuster is? And he's still young. So I mean, we'll see. While we're talking about the Chiefs, since we're talking about the Chiefs, we should hit on the backfield. And after an early fumble, we saw Carson Steele get usurped by Kareem Hunt, who had 67% of the running back carries against the Chargers. Samaje Perine got the touchdown, but he was still in kind of that secondary role that we had seen him in last week. It seems like that's where Samaje Perine is going to operate. Carson Steele ended up playing just 11 snaps. He finished with 2 carries. This is an interesting situation. I was lower on Steele than most as a waiver ad because I thought this situation would be fluid, both with Kareem Hunt. We still have no idea what's going on with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I've not seen any reporting that he's coming back, but he is eligible now to come back this week, and obviously he's dealing with a personal situation that is odd, and unless I miss something, I don't know what's going on with him. So this is a very fluid situation. I always also want to make the point that Kareem Hunt was pretty bad last year with the Browns, and so he's not coming off a good season. So there's a lot of caveats here. But Kareem Hunt is a veteran. Steele has fumbled before. This was not his first fumble. As soon as he fumbled, we saw Hunt really take over that job, and Hunt had some success against the Chargers. And so I put all that together, and I think that we're going to see Kareem Hunt kind of in the lead role moving forward. And I am probably more interested in Hunt this week than I was in Steele 2 weeks ago, because I mean, he's Kareem Hunt. He's a veteran. We know a lot more about him as a player, but I still don't know if I'm going all in on him like I might, if Breece Hall got hurt and it was Braylon Allen, I'd be all in on that. I don't know. I'm not going to be there for Kareem Hunt, because I still think there's some fluidity in this situation for sure.
Yeah, and if nothing else, that whatever he does is temporary, right? Because once Isaiah Pacheco comes back, that's still his job. I don't think there's anything Kareem Hunt can do to necessarily usurp him and take the top spot in the backfield. But you're right. I mean, you just look at the options they have right now. And, we were both higher on Samaje Perine coming out of that injury from Pacheco. And he's kind of just fallen back into the role that he always has, right? Dating back to his time in Cincinnati when he was backing up Joe Mixon, where, he can be an option in the passing game, although he didn't get a single target against the Chargers. But he seems to be your classic number 2 running back. And he got the touchdown, but he still finished with only 5 carries for 14 yards. So Kareem Hunt right now seems to be, by all accounts, he's the number 1 guy. I know Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you said he is eligible to return this week. Ian Rappaport reported that they expect him to return this week. So maybe that changes the chemistry in this backfield once again. But I have a feeling that if Kareem Hunt remains productive, he's going to be the lead back moving forward until Isaiah Pacheco gets healthy.
Yeah, I've been head down, so I did not see that from Ian Rappaport. Yeah, so that changes the Kareem Hunt story even more. And so again, that makes me less excited. Although CEH, we haven't seen the best from him either. And so yeah, it's a tough situation. What I am interested, I don't know if I made this point before. I've thought this for a long time. It's very interesting if you watch Samaje Perine at Oklahoma and you kind of listen to the conversations about him when he came out of school. The fact that he has turned into this third down back extraordinaire is just, it's so interesting, the kind of career arc that he's taken. So I mean, but he's probably going to be involved as long as Pacheco is out. And like you said, we don't really know how long that's going to be. His injury, the timetable they gave felt optimistic for the injury that he has and what we've seen from that injury. But, maybe it's not. Maybe it wasn't as serious as we saw. We're not in the room. We don't know. And so ultimately all of this is temporary. But if we get 6 weeks of Kareem Hunt as a starter, that's, you're gonna take that, especially if you were like a 0 running back drafter and you've been really dying for that waiver wire guy. You're certainly going to take that, but I don't know if he's going to be that guy. What I will say is there's another injury this week that could create some kind of that similar situation, and maybe a little bit more of a solid situation, and that is Jonathan Taylor. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about Jonathan Taylor's injury and kind of what we think about his recovery timetable and what we're really looking at here.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be terribly long. I know when it first happened yesterday, it was reported as a high ankle sprain, which what we know from that, usually that's about a 4-week injury. Jordan Love, he had a high ankle sprain, or I guess he sprained MCL, so that was a knee sprain. But that's a similar sort of injury, and he ended up missing, 3.5 weeks. And that was viewed as an unbelievable comeback. Can't believe he got healthy that quick. But Shane Steichen said today there's no plans to put Jonathan Taylor on the IR, and he classified simply as an ankle sprain, not a high ankle sprain. So either that's just, the terminology he used and it's a low ankle sprain and it's not as serious, or he doesn't believe it to be as serious as some other high ankle sprains. But I think the fact that they don't plan on putting him on the IR, now he did say as of now, so maybe that changes, makes me feel that it's a shorter term injury. It's only going to be at most a couple week situation, and he could have a shot to play this week.
It does remind me of of the great Denny Carter joke about, I even made the joke last night about how, it's a high ankle sprain, but it's mild. It's the lowest high ankle sprain you've ever seen. The lowest high ankle. With high ankles thrown around, and they come in and they try to like mitigate it. We saw this with Joe Mixon. Do you remember in like the day after Joe Mixon was hurt on that hip drop tackle, which apparently we still don't call, by the way, when he was hurt on that hip drop tackle,
Gopher.
they were like, we're gonna, he's fine, and here we are 2 games later. It does look like he's coming back this week, to be fair, but here we are 2 games later, and we haven't seen him. So I think Jonathan Taylor's definitely going to miss time, and the analysis for this is pretty straightforward on Taylor. Trey Sermon is the only running back other than Taylor to get a carry this season. He came in and got 5 carries in this game after Taylor left. He has actually been a feature of the deep cut section for a while now as that guy. If he's going to be the main running back behind Jonathan Taylor, unfortunately Taylor has missed some time in recent years, which is disappointing because he's looked amazing this year. I think we even talked about that last week, how amazing that he's looked. And I think Sermon's going to get at least one start, and we'll see how many more. And ultimately, if you just need a starting running back, if maybe you were living off of 2 Cam Akers starts, which those didn't go as well as we had hoped, and you need to transition somewhere else, that Sermon's going to be there and he's going to get at least one, I would say, a couple starts. The Colts do play in Jacksonville this week. Jacksonville has actually been pretty stout against the run. They're 6th in yards per carry allowed to running backs this season, but they've given up 5 touchdowns to the position. And so, that kind of balances out, how good they've been from a fantasy perspective. And so we'll have to see how this works out. But the Colts also have an interesting situation at quarterback with Anthony Richardson, who also left this game early with what appears to be a hip injury. So how serious is this injury? Why did they run him again after he came back into the game? Lots of questions for you about this Anthony Richardson injury.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because he obviously got hurt. I think he only missed 2 plays and came back, and then they decided to run another quarterback run, and he went out, and it was classified as a hip pointer by a couple reports. Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson both kind of downplayed it and said he's just sore, he should be fine, no big deal. But this is also just a recurring situation with Anthony Richardson, who played just 1 full game in his rookie year. Of his 4 starts, 3 of them he left early due to injury. This year he made it through weeks 1 through 3 healthy, but now he's hurt again. And it's a situation where we love him because of how physical he is, what a great runner he is, just what a absolute physical specimen he is for that position. But maybe he can't hold up to that kind of workload. Like it's clear that something tends to happen week after week after week. So I don't think this is necessarily a serious injury, but we've reached a point now with this guy where in over half of his starts in the NFL, he can't finish the game. I wonder if there comes a point where his value as a fantasy quarterback based on, what he adds to the running game maybe, disappears a little bit because they realize they have to keep this guy healthy and, limit his touches in that part of the offense.
And actually, Rich Rebar talked about this in his worksheet columns last week, which is, as I mentioned, are part of our fantasy package, which is until Monday at midnight, you can get 57% off using promo code points. But he talked about this last week with Anthony Richardson, as we actually haven't seen those ceiling performances that the 2 weeks prior to this. And it's one of the reasons is we're not seeing him scramble as much. He does have those designed runs, but we don't see him scramble as much. He's not getting kind of that part of it like we see with Jaden Daniels, for instance. And so it really, his rushing upside was kind of limited a little bit to design runs. And I think your point, if this is going to persist, even if Anthony Richardson is able to come back and play this week against the Jaguars, which is a pretty good matchup for him, if this persists, how much are we going to see them use these design runs? But then you ask that and you say, okay, but he was hurt, and then literally he came back after missing time and they ran him again. So is this just what they're going to do? Like it's a fair question. From a fantasy perspective, I don't know if he's going to miss time. If he misses time, the kind of 2 avenues, 2 things to think about from a waiver wire perspective. Our first, Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco put up 168 yards and 2 touchdowns to close out the win in week 4. He obviously put up massive numbers last year with the Browns. He averaged 323 passing yards a game with 13 touchdowns over 5 starts. So he put up massive fantasy numbers. We saw him really supercharge that Browns passing game. I think ultimately, if Flacco is getting a start in two quarterback formats, you're going to be very interested in playing him. Maybe even in DFS, we're going to be interested in looking at him. And, we'll just kind of have to see where that goes. But also, we think about the wide receivers here. Michael Pittman is not available in any leagues. And to be fair to him, he had a long catch with Richardson. And so, he was having a pretty good game even with Richardson. But when you really think about the effect Flacco could have from a waiver wire perspective, you think about Josh Downs, who had 7 catches for 71 yards and his touchdown with Flacco in the game in week 4. He was targeted on 38.1% of his routes. And if we go back to last year, the numbers weren't as good as that with Gardner Minshew, but we did see him have a route spike with Gardner Minshew there. And I think that Downs is kind of one of those receivers who's going to need volume, which you're not going to get as much of probably with Richardson as a passer. We know the concerns we have as Richardson as a passer, and kind of those types of slot shorter targets for Downs. He's probably going to get a few more of those from Flacco. So if Flacco starts, I'm certainly going to be much more interested in Downs than if we get Richardson back. But ultimately, this feels like a very fluid situation that we might not know that much about until Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah, especially with an injury like this, where it is such a gray area, and this is a situation where, probably come Wednesday, he's limited in practice, and he might be limited all week and questionable heading into the weekend, but probably leaning towards playing. But yeah, I mean, if Flacco plays, he just kind of raises the floor of that passing offense because it changes the trajectory of that offense too. We mentioned Anthony Richardson not necessarily scrambling, but they're still running a pretty run-heavy offense, right? Like Joe Flacco had 16 completions on Sunday. Anthony Richardson has one start this year with more. He was 17 of 34 in week 2. Other than that, he wasn't completing nearly the volume of passes that Joe Flacco will. So if nothing else, Joe Flacco, if he's in the game, he's spreading the ball around. He's getting guys touches. And if you're in a PPR format, that can be huge. So raise guys like Alec Pierce, like Josh Downs. I mean, their floor immediately raises quite a bit.
Yeah, Downs is available in a lot of leagues. And ultimately, I mean, now that he's coming back healthy, you might still be interested in PPR, regardless if Richardson or Flacco are playing. But I certainly am more interested if we're going to get a start out of Flacco, especially, this week and what's a decent matchup at least. All right, let's move on to Christian Watson, who, I mean, the best news I can say about this Christian Watson injury is it wasn't a hamstring. So, hey, we're taking a step in the right direction.
Yeah, no more soft tissue injuries, which that was a big thing this offseason, right? He tried to work on like his gait and his running style to make sure there were no imbalances in his legs so he wouldn't get any soft tissue injuries. Well, mission accomplished, but now he's got a high ankle sprain and could be headed to the IR. I think he's expected to miss multiple weeks. He was able to walk off the field, but then he was carted into the locker room. So this is a situation where, he's definitely not going to be back this week. Maybe sometimes next week we get a better feel as if he can come back, but probably leaning towards an IR stint. If you kind of look ahead, the Packers, I think they have a bye in week 10. So if he heads to the IR, maybe you have him miss 5 games instead of 4, and then you give him that bye in week 10 and he comes back week 11. That probably seems like a realistic timeline for him to come back. But I would say, 60% chance he ends up on the IR and a similar kind of chance that he doesn't come back until after their bye week in week 10.
And I do, I don't want to make light of it because I do feel bad for him because he did all that work. He had, all of those issues, earlier in his career, and he did the work that he needed to do. And then you just kind of have, this is just a freak injury. This is not like an injury prone thing. This is just your ankle got rolled up and
It's a football injury. It's nothing more. You're on the field. It happens.
Yeah, this is not an injury prone kind of injury. This is just a, something bad happened. It kind of is what it is. So you do feel bad for Watson from a waiver wire perspective. I mean, Romeo Doubs is out there in like 75% of leagues. We know who he is. He's going to run probably the most routes of all of the Packers wide receivers. He's not going to get as many targets. However, he is a factor near the end zone. He could come up with a 2 touchdown game randomly, but the kind of weekly fantasy upside is probably not as high for him as it is for someone like Jaden Reed, obviously, who, is not available in any leagues. And Rich and I have already eaten our crow on Jaden Reed and being worried about Jaden Reed in draft season. We were wrong. We've made a culpa on all that. We're all in on Jaden Reed. But if we're talking about a waiver wire guy, the answer is obviously Dontayvion Wicks, who's available in about 90% of leagues. He was a, very popular sleeper, especially, later on in draft season. So there are a lot of deeper leagues leagues in which he's probably still on rosters. But even in some of those deeper leagues, he might have been dropped. He had 3 catches through the first 3 weeks. Obviously, Jordan Love wasn't there. I'm in a league where he was dropped last week, and I just went and picked him up because I knew Jordan Love was coming back. And, that ended up working out for me. Actually, I had to start him because of injuries. That ended up working out. So we're feeling pretty good. But, with Dontayvion Wicks, he ran a route on 86.3% of the pass plays without Watson this past week. He had 13 targets. He turned those into 5 catches for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. And if you're talking about upside when on the field, upside when he gets targets, Dontayvion Wicks is that guy that we're excited about kind of in this passing game. There's another guy. I'll talk about him a little bit later when we do deep cuts. But from a wide receiver perspective, Dontayvion Wicks is that guy, and he's certainly somebody I'm targeting this week if he's available, out there in your leagues.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly, I think, the big winner in this situation. You mentioned, like, you look at his numbers, and he had 5 for 78 and 2 touchdowns. But the fact that he had 13 targets after only having, I think, 9 or 10 through the first 3 weeks, I mean, it was clearly a concerted effort to get him the ball once Christian Watson went out. And if he can be kind of the high volume guy over someone like Dobbs or Jaden Reed, that's a pretty good spot to be in with Jordan Love throwing you the ball.
A couple more injuries here that didn't happen on Sunday from a little bit earlier in the week. The first is Malik Nabers suffered a concussion on Thursday. I guess my question is, this isn't a normal week for them. They're coming back from that Thursday night game. They're playing in Seattle this week. You mentioned something in your column about like the average time to return from concussions. I would say, you can't take anything for granted, but we're feeling pretty good about his chances to get through the concussion protocol because of those extra days, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. There's really been nothing reported on it this week. Like, I thought it would be something that they would talk about, sometime today. Brian Dable would say, hey, he's in concussion protocol. Like, or even this weekend, a report would come out. Really nothing. It's been oddly quiet. But yeah, you look at I think the median time frame for a player to come through concussion protocol is about 9 days. And if you look, Thursday through the following Sunday is 10 days. I think if I did my math correctly. So there's a shot he plays. Like, this is the one situation I think where you could, have a concussion on Thursday and have a very realistic shot of coming back the following week. So because he had that Thursday game, I do think it's pretty likely that, come later in the week, maybe Friday or Saturday, that there's a good chance he's clearing concussion protocol and going. Those couple extra days, I think, really bought him that availability. Because even you look at, Lane Johnson suffered a concussion for the Eagles in week 3. Jake Glazer reported on Saturday that he was healthy, that he was good to go. And then the Eagles neurologist came back and said, we're going to hold you out. We're going to let you sit through the bye week and do it. So maybe something similar happens to Malik Nabers, where if it's close, they decide to, be precautionary and let him sit. But I tend to think and, have a good feeling that if everything goes according to plan, if he recovers the way most NFL players recover Friday or Saturday, he might be able to clear concussion protocol in time for Sunday's game.
And to your point, I mean, we saw last week, we talked about Trey McBride and Devonta Smith, and we were very pessimistic about their chances of getting through the protocol in 1 week, and they didn't. They ended up sitting out, which is good. Happy that people are taking these injuries very seriously. But then when we have, something like this, maybe that extra time, if you're trying to look for ads on the wire for Malik Nabers, my overall thought on this is that we've seen this passing game without Malik Nabers and Daniel Jones at quarterback, and it's not great. And so if you're trying to look at, okay, is Wan'Dale Robinson going to replace Malik Nabers' targets? Is Darius Slayton, if he's still on the team, going to replace the fact that every single New York Giants beat writer at the same time speculated about Darius Slayton to the Chiefs is interesting. Is all I'm saying. The fact that if you go and search Darius Slayton, you see 7 different articles from 7 different websites about him going to the Chiefs. That's just something to know. It's something to think about as we kind of move forward here. But even if Darius Slayton maybe is a better fit for those types of Nabers targets, is he going to come out and be Malik Nabers? No. And
Yeah, I
so
don't think it'll be the considered effort to get him the ball, right? Like, they're going to roll lining him up in the backfield and have him run flag routes between the B gap. Like, he's going to be a very traditional outside wide receiver.
Exactly. And so this is the mistake we make a lot of times. We make it a lot of times in the offseason. We talk about available targets, and a star wide receiver leaves. We talk about available targets. Well, that player was getting those targets because they're that player. Nabers was getting the targets he was getting because he's Malik Nabers. And so that's my kind of grain of salt for all of this is we kind of think he might play in week 5, given the extra time he has. And B, none of these guys that you're going to pick up off the wire are Malik Nabers. That's the thing. What I will say is that, especially if you're in like a deeper PPR league, maybe not even a deeper PPR league, you can still go and look at Wan'Dale Robinson, who's available in 73% of leagues. He's getting enough targets. He's averaging 10 targets per game, even with Nabers in there. And so all of that's there. He's not really filling the same role that Nabers does. He's averaging 4.7 air yards per target. He is very good after the catch, but he's still not creating enough on that kind of usage to really be a difference maker. So, you look at all of that, and I'm not getting too excited about him in standard leagues, but in PPR leagues, he's already been producing. He's already, been getting the targets. And so, yeah, I'm happy to go pick up Wan'Dale Robinson. I probably would have been happy to go pick up Wan'Dale Robinson, even if Malik Nabers, didn't have this concussion issue. And even if we think he's probably going to play in week 5, that's still there for Robinson with the upside. Maybe he gets a few more targets, but ultimately this passing game is not going to work as well without Nabers. And so I'm not going to go out of my way to really kind of target any of those guys.
No, it's not necessarily a situation where they're loaded with talent at that position. And you could see it on Thursday night, right? Their entire offense was, how much can we get Malik Nabers the ball? And they don't have anybody else who's really worth that kind of attention. So I think it's going to go back to maybe looking like the Giants offense of last year, where who knows, maybe Jalen Hyatt finally gets some touches. Maybe they start getting hints of work. But for the most part, there's no one necessarily worth getting exciting about, besides Wan'Dale Robinson, who has become an insane volume target for them through the first 4 weeks.
Yeah, a 20 target Wan'Dale Robinson game is where we're headed here. One more injury to mention, and this was actually a practice injury from last week. I believe it happened on Thursday near the end of practice, and that was Davante Adams with a hamstring late week rule out. I think they said week to week. I don't think we know anything concrete about this injury, but all the tea leaves I've seen are not particularly positive as we're thinking about, when's the next time we're going to see him on the field.
No, I mean, week to week is a pretty grim thing to hear in the NFL. Like, outside of sure our eye stint, week to week is pretty much as bad as it gets. And who knows? I mean, Antonio Pierce said a couple of weeks ago that, people were making business decisions. Now they were going to making business decisions, and there have been started to be, rumors about maybe Davante Adams not playing for the Raiders anymore, and maybe they'll try to find a trade partner in the next couple of weeks before the trade deadline. I wonder if this is a situation where they are precautionary. They're keeping him on ice, and maybe if they expect to trade him, they don't try to bring him back. Maybe they just figure he's better off trying to get healthy. We don't want to put him back out there and risk re-injury. I don't know. I don't think there's a definite shot he's played his last snap as a Las Vegas Raider, but it certainly is a possibility.
Yeah, there's part of this that feels, I'm not doubting that he is actually hurt. I believe even reporters saw him pull up. So like, I'm sure he probably has an injury, but I do think there is a kind of aura of this being a little bit more than just an injury. And we'll have to see what happens. I mean, if you're looking for somebody to replace Rice in that Kansas City offense, we can wish cash Davante Adams there. Would they trade a division? Probably not. But are we gonna have like a Celtics Drew Holiday situation where they have to trade him somewhere else, who then trades them? Are we gonna get like a little way like that? I don't know. We'll have to see. Trey Tucker was actually part of the deep cuts section last week. He's probably yeah, that's right. I forgot. Every time we have a Tucker name, Tucker is 100% in on. And this one worked out for you. This one was perfect. He ended up with 5 catches on 6 targets, 41 yards. He got a rushing touchdown as well. If Adams is going to sit out, Trey Tucker is going to be the number 2 wide receiver behind Jakobi Meyers. I could see a scenario as we move forward where, Brock Bowers did not have the game that we were hoping for this week, but we see a lot of Brock Bowers targets, a lot of Jakobi Meyers targets, and that's pretty much it. But Trey Tucker is available in enough leagues. If he's going to be the number 2 wide receiver, he's certainly worth a look, especially since he came off that good game in week 3. We were getting a little bit interested in him then too. And so you kind of just stack a couple good games together and you're certainly interested in him on the wire. A couple other names I want to talk about here before we get out of here. Xavier Legette is certainly one we need to mention. He was a pickup for me last week. I talked about how involved he had been this year with Adam Thielen off the field. Adam Thielen did end up on injured reserve, as I believe you speculated he would
old
last
hamstrings,
week.
man.
The
34-year-old
an old folk
coming back from a hamstring injury that quickly.
As I always say, I am, of course, not an elite NFL athlete, but I am 39 years old. And when I have an ankle injury at 39 years old, it takes a lot longer than it did when I was 25. So I'm with Adam Thielen in this situation. But I mentioned how much he had been involved without Thielen on the field. He ran as many routes as Diontae Johnson in week 4. He had a 25% target share. Obviously got into the end zone. We saw him earn targets, which was one of our concerns. Both Rich and I were on him last week. He was on our Thursday show. We do the segment called Uncut Gems about guys that might be available. They're certainly on fewer rosters and fewer starting lineups than you would like. Both of us were on Leggett, and it paid off. And the Panthers, and this is kind of the overarching situation with Leggett, if you're looking at him as a waiver ad, the Panthers are the situation we love for fantasy. Their defense is bad, and they appear to have, at worst, a functional offense with Andy Dalton. And you put those two things together, and you ended up with high-scoring games. And so our betting expert, Pam Maldonado, had the over in that Bengals and Panthers game. She even laddered it a little bit. She didn't quite hit the 60, the top of the ladder, but she hit the rung below that with at 56 points, which was a nice payout. And these Panthers games could turn into this kind of situation. The Colts from last year, the Commanders this season, those types of teams can get into really nice fantasy game environments, and we can see a lot of that from the Panthers moving forward. So I'm certainly excited about Xavier Leggett and kind of where we're going with him.
Yeah, I mean, that Panthers offense you mentioned, like, he certainly deserved a bigger target share. And with Andy Dalton, kind of like with Joe Flacco, like, he just raises the floor of that offense. That those guys, the weapons they have, they don't necessarily have a great running back right now, with Chuba Hubbard kind of leading the way, although their rookie running back will be coming back, right? Jonathan Brooks should be back at some point this season. So
not this week, though. They did make it clear. I believe Canales made it clear that it's not this week, but you're right. At some point in the future, he's
at some
back.
point they'll have talent in the backfield, which will be a nice change of pace for them.
Well, Chuba Hubbard, to be fair to Chuba Hubbard, I have to be fair to Chuba Hubbard. These last 2 weeks with an actual functional passing game, he's been fine. As it turns out, if there's a functional passing game, it makes it a little bit easier to run the ball. To be fair to Chuba Hubbard, but you're right. If Brooks is who we thought he was, and again, he's coming off an injury, he's a rookie, we'll see what happens here. But if Brooks is kind of what he showed last year at Texas, that's a different level of running game that we're getting excited about.
Right, and this offense becomes a little bit more multi-dimensional, and maybe you don't have to rely on Andy Dalton's arm that much. But as it stands right now, I mean, you just see what competent quarterback play does to those weapons and that offense right now.
We have a question here in the chat from Anthony. Do you think Xavier Worthy will end up being huge for the Chiefs going forward? I do think, I think he's important. He's obviously very important. His ability to stretch the field. We saw that touchdown pass that Mahomes threw, I believe was his longest touchdown pass since Tyreek Hill, before Tyreek Hill left the team. So from like an air yards perspective. So it's that element that they've really needed and been missing for a long time. I do continue to worry, even without Rice there, are they going to manufacture some more shorter touches, shorter targets for Worthy to get him, more opportunities? He still had, I think, 4 targets in that game, if I'm remembering right. And so it wasn't like we had him come out here and get the 8 targets we might like to see for him. Does that change with Rice out? Do we see them, kind of use him in different ways? Are we going to continue to see him, get these fewer targets, run these routes that are targeted less in general, so fewer targets per route, and targets that are generally less successful, so fewer catches per target? Or are we going to continue to see him do those kind of routes? They're going to get him more involved. I'm not sure. Given the rest of the receivers they have on the roster, barring a trade, I would hope that that's what they do. I hope that that's what we see. And as I said earlier, I do kind of think this is just going to be the Travis Kelce and Xavier Worthy show as we move forward, like it was at the end of last season. It was the Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice show. I kind of think that that's what we'll see moving forward. But, we do need to see a bit of a change here for Worthy from how they're using him for me to feel, 100% sold on that.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much basically being used just as a deep threat right now, which is nice because it's something the offense hasn't really had since Tyreek Hill left. But I think his average depth of target right now is over 11 yards, which is pretty crazy in that offense from what we've seen the last couple of years. So you're right. Like, it'll be interesting moving forward if they, try to get him the ball on screens or maybe, end arounds, kind of like they did on his first touchdown in week 1, where they gave it to him on that jet sweep. Maybe they try to manufacture more touches just because they're down one more playmaker on the outside with Rashee Rice done for the season.
Yeah, I'm hopeful we see a change, but I do think we're projecting a change. That is a really important thing to remember. We are hoping to see it, not that we think we will. And so that's an important kind of distinction we always have to remember when we're thinking about fantasy. A couple other names here. I mean, Alexander Mattison's going to be a popular name this week because he had a few long runs. He's certainly been more effective than Zamir White. And we had Antonio Pierce come out on Monday and say that he's earned more carries. I'm still kind of out on this situation. A little bit still out on this situation. White has struggled all year. 4.1% of his carries have been for 10 or more yards. He's just not making explosive carries. Still has had 70% of the running back carries. How many could Mattison get? I just don't know how excited I am about this situation. If it is even going to still be a little bit of a split with kind of what we've seen from this running game. So Alexander Mattison might be a player I let go to other teams when we do fab bidding. A couple more real quick here in deep cuts. The Packer that I mentioned earlier that I'm excited about is Tucker Kraft. I recommended Tucker Kraft as we got another. It's exclusively Tuckers from here on out that we're going to talk about.
How far down is Justin Tucker falling down the Tucker power rankings right now? I mean, he held that top spot for like a decade, but now you have Tucker Kraft, you have Trey Tucker.
Yeah,
worth considering.
Tough scenes for the GOAT kicker. But on Tucker Kraft, I had him as a recommended stash last week. We saw exactly what we wanted to see in Jordan Love's first game back. Love has 91 dropbacks this season. Tucker Kraft has run a route on 75 of those, so 82.4% route participation with 12 targets. Luke Musgrave has run a route on 24 of those, so 26.4% route participation with 5 targets. In week 4, Kraft ran 48 routes. Musgrave ran 16. Kraft had 9 targets. Musgrave had 3. We had a concern coming into the season about, okay, will one of these tight ends move far enough ahead of the other one that we could actually get usable weeks? It seems like we've seen that Kraft do that. And, it is tough because there's still, even with Watson out, there's still so many good wide receivers in Green Bay. Can Kraft get the second or third most targets every week? I don't know. And so that's tough. But also you look at what Kraft can do after the catch. He's number 1 in yards after catch per reception among tight ends with at least 50 targets over the last 2 years. And so he has established himself as a dynamic guy who can make yards after the catch. And you kind of put all that together in the tight end world that we live in. And I'm certainly very interested in Tucker Kraft this week. Like I said, I've already added him to rosters, but he's still available in a ton of leagues. And if you're really hurting at tight end, you can look at that. And I tweeted out those stats about Kraft, and I got a really good question about, would you rather have Mark Andrews or Tucker Kraft? And my answer to that question is I don't know, because we're in such this weird situation with Mark Andrews, but we saw Mark Andrews run a route on fewer 50% of the dropbacks this past week. He's not running the routes. He's not getting the targets. When he gets the targets, he drops the ball. This is the Mark Andrews, and Rich and I talked about it last week, so I don't want to belabor it too much, but the Mark Andrews situation is so odd to me. It's probably the oddest fantasy situation of this kind of first 4 weeks, because of all the possible outcomes for Mark Andrews this year, him simply not being on the field and running routes was not in what I was thinking about. And that's been just the oddest thing here with Mark Andrews.
And what's crazy is Isaiah Likely is no longer getting the targets, right? It'd be one thing if you were getting replaced, and right, no one in that offense is. But, we did this after week 1, and he had, 12 targets and 9 catches. He's got 6 targets and 5 catches since in the last 3 games. He hasn't topped 26 yards in a single game. It's not like he's gotten replaced. It's just that part of the offense, and really just the entire passing part of their offense has disappeared. But they just have no production from tight end. But that's also, like you said, that's league wide. I mean, there hasn't been more than a handful of big games from tight ends so far this season.
Yeah, and that's really when I'm trying to think about who I'm going to suggest on the waiver wire from a tight end perspective. First of all, the pickings are slim. And so that's why I'm still okay with Zach Ertz, because if Zach Ertz is just going to get you 4 for 40, that's kind of fine. That's better than some highly drafted, wide receiver tight ends are getting you. And so I'm okay with that. And so it's just kind of this weird situation we're in. And I'm at least hopeful that Kraft can be more than that, because he's in a passing game that we like. We know that he's dynamic. And so hopefully, we can get a little bit better. And so that's why I'm interested in him, because otherwise you're thinking about Cade Otton and Tyler Conklin and names like that. And you're just it's tough. it's tough to get excited about that kind of thing. One more question here before we get out of there. Besides Terry McLaurin, do you like any Washington wide receivers? Obviously just mentioned Zach Ertz, who's just going to run a ton of routes and catch 3 passes every week. That's what he does. But any wide receivers? I've been on Noah Brown all season, really, ever since they made that signing. I think Noah Brown is an actually very good wide receiver. Maybe not very good. He's a solid NFL wide receiver. I think he's kind of what they needed to step up in that number 2. And we actually saw him run a route on, I want to make sure I got the numbers right here, 72.2% of the dropbacks this week. So he's established himself as that number 2 wide receiver. And, as we see that, he ended up with 4 targets. He caught 3 of them. I expect that to continue to grow for Noah Brown. Will it be enough for him to be like a regular fantasy starter in a normal size league? I'm not sure. I'm not going to read too much into, what we saw from Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus ran a route on 30.6% of the routes. That was actually fewer than Luke McCaffrey. I know Zacchaeus got some targets, but I'm more interested in who's on the field. And who's on the field in that number 2 spot is Noah Brown. And so that's where I would go with this. But I don't know if any of them are going to consistently return value. And so that's kind of where we are. I hope they do, because Rich and I had a marriage bickering squabble over Noah Brown right before the start of the season. So I'm hopeful Noah Brown comes good, just so I can rub it in Rich's face. All right, that's it for us. We really appreciate you listening to this. Remember, head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can find early kind of drafts of my waiver wire article and Tucker's injury article over there already. We'll update those throughout the week. I'll have mine on Tuesday morning. Tucker, probably after practices are over on Wednesday, we'll have a nice update with all 32 teams. Make sure you check that out. Insightful information as we're trying to make plans for the week to come as it comes to injuries. Also, remember the worksheet columns from Rich Rebar, who, again, even though I would like Noah Brown to be good so I can laugh at him, is the best in the business as it comes to fantasy. Previews every single game, every single week in his worksheet columns. That's part of our fantasy package. If you're listening to this before midnight on Monday, you can get 57% off of that fantasy package with discount code POINTS. So make sure you do that. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Subscribe to us on the podcast. We really appreciate that. And Tucker and I will be back to talk with you next week.